got into my van, and I had my wood roses, and I was going to go out selling, and I got into the van, and I drove past the intersection, and I was about to get on the main highway, and just as I was driving in this direction, I looked over to my left, and I saw the Apex police car sitting there. And as I drove past, I realized I was not wearing my seatbelt. And I drove past, and sure enough, the lights come on, they kind of swing around, they pull up behind me, I get on the highway, I start going down the highway 55 miles an hour, and the lights go on, pull me aside. I would sit there and wait, get out of the car. They get out of the car. One comes up on the left to me, one comes up on the right. There was a young guy, Apex cop, and then there was a woman in there looking in the van. And he says, "License and registration, sir. You know, I stopped you because you weren't wearing your seatbelt when I saw you." I already had as soon as I drove past him, I put my seatbelt on. I'm sitting there, and all I could do was go, I'm not going to make an excuse. And so they walk back to their car, and I'm sitting there, and with everything that's been going on, we had gotten the information about, I knew Saturday morning I was going to go to Winston-Salem to be with Wellborn. I know all of you are aware that Saturday morning at 10 o'clock, it was actually scheduled that Wellborn would leave us and go to the spiritual world. And so I'm thinking, sitting there, and so many things are going through my mind. I'm angry at myself, but I'm also angry at this law. That says I have to drive with this belt on and I'm angry thinking that this is going to cost like $100, and here I am, I'm going out to go selling to make money to pay bills, and now my whole day, I'm going to go out there and sell the whole day just to pay this ticket. And I'm thinking I'm so stupid and I'm arrogant, but at the same time, but then I just sat there and I just felt, God, I don't want, how can I word this? I don't want to have privileged treatment. I want to have providential treatment. I don't want to be treated with privilege. Like I'm not going to ask God, "Oh, please, God, don't give me a ticket." But I want to be part of the providence. And if it's part of the providence that I learn this lesson, this hard lesson, to stop being, pick your battles. If the law is the law, if you're going to drive without your seatbelt, then that's what's going to happen. Comes back to the car. He's waving the paper. Says, "All right, Mr. Pace, this is just a warning. This is not a ticket. It's not going to cost you any money. But, you gotta drive with your seatbelt on." And I was so, I can't explain how profoundly I just felt so grateful and so moved and so appreciative of the fact that I felt understood, that where I know where you're coming from. This is a law, but it's, I felt so appreciative. And I said, "Officer, I promise, from now on, I'm just going to wear my seatbelt. I'm going to be more careful about it." And as he said, "Go ahead and have a better day." He said, "Go and have a better day." And I just was so moved by that, and I felt the power of when you have a position of authority, when you have a position where you're supposed to be, subjective over another person's life, or you're the teacher, or you're the parent, or you're in charge, that this is a really powerful place to be, because you have the power to affect people's minds and hearts. And that experience really helped me to deal with the experience this morning. When we were driving here to church, and I got stopped for doing 57 in a 45 mile an hour by the Apex police. And this time they are looking for the money. So the fine is $30. The court cost is $188. But he explained to me, even if I send in the fine, you still have to pay the court cost. So he was, obviously we were a van full of people, and evidently he didn't notice Chloe in the back. Otherwise, of course, his heart would have been melted, and he would have said, "Oh my God, what a beautiful daughter, and she's so special, I can't give you a ticket." But he was a young guy, so he didn't see her in the back. And even though Mrs. Pace was trying to explain that I was the pastor and I was on my way to church, thank you very much for your help, sweetheart. I'm sure that made him feel really. I got the ticket anyway. But I can go November 5th and plead my case, and we'll see what happens. But anyway, let's talk about the real devil. There he is. I don't know if you're aware of it, but the Rolling Stones on July 1st came to Raleigh, and they were at the Carter Finley Stadium. Mick Jagger and Ron Wood and Keith Richards, Charlie Watts. You'll notice these guys, look at the makeup. They make themselves look so elderly, right? Actually, I think the youngest is about 72 years old, Mick Jagger. So it's almost a joke, you know. I mean, these guys are going to come and they're going to put on a rock and roll concert, please. I had no, you know, I'm not going to go and pay $100 or more to go see these guys. Well, I got a call Wednesday morning. My mom told me that my brother was trying to get in touch with me. And my brother Steve was on his way back from a beach trip, and he said, "John, you want to go tonight to see the Rolling Stones? You and Brother Jim and, you know, Margaret, his girlfriend, had extra tickets because some of her family was not going to go." So at first, my initial reaction, honestly, my initial reaction was, I'm not interested. And, you know, I'm not a Rolling Stones person. You know, I'm sure Mamaru would be able to appreciate it's the Beatles, not the Rolling Stones, you know. I mean, the Beatles were able, in my mind and in my heart, all through the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. After I joined our movement, I always looked at the Rolling Stones as being the Kane type of rock and roll, whereas the Beatles were able-like, you know. Anyway, then I thought to myself, my God, today is our 33rd wedding anniversary. And Sharon, she knew that this was a special opportunity because I was going to be there with my brothers, okay? Doing things with your brothers at this stage in the game is actually serious, and this was a gift from my brother's girlfriend, so I said, okay, let's do it. So I went. There, you can see where we sat. We were right up here. Oh, there's me. There's my brother Jim. There's my brother Steve. There's Margaret, and there's Margaret's two daughters. They're about in their 20s. They were there too. Here's the stage. Here's a huge platform that came all the way out, where you know, see how far into the audience Mick Jagger and his crew would come walking in. I have to tell you, I was shocked. I was so pleasantly surprised at what I experienced. I was so impressed. These guys, they came out, and from the beginning to the end, they played for 2 hours. I mean, and Mick Jagger, and they were up and down that stage, and they were left and right, and they were singing all the songs, and every song they sang, all of us were singing it with them. You know, it was one big family of 40,000 plus people. And and then Mick Jagger said, you know, he said, I remember we were here in Raleigh 50 years ago. They played at Reynolds Coliseum. Reynolds Coliseum is also NC State University. This was, you know, Carter Finley Stadium is the Wolfpack football stadium. Reynolds Coliseum is North Carolina State basketball. It's much smaller, but it was 50 years ago. Put that number in your head. 50 years ago, this rock and roll group came to Raleigh, North Carolina. I was 11 years old. 12 years old, I think. We had just moved from New York. And they played their rock and roll, some of the same songs. 50 years later, the same 4 guys, the same 4 people are still together, playing their music, and putting on a show. What?
They're all alive still.
They're all alive.
Unbelievable.
But they're more than alive, you know. They're icons of rock and roll. And I thought about what I was experiencing here. And there was something so hysterical and historical about it. You know, the Beatles, everyone knows the Beatles. Well, I was talking with my brother, you know, the Beatles made 13 albums. The last albums the Beatles made was in 1970. 4 years before I even joined the Unification Church, when I was still a teenager, already the Beatles didn't make any more albums. And they didn't put on any more concerts. All of the 1970s, the 1980s, the 1990s, as popular as the Beatles were, they were already separated from each other. But somehow, of all the rock and roll people in the world, of all the groups you can talk about and think about, these 4 guys. And I was so impressed. And they did one of my favorite songs, Sympathy for the Devil. And it's an amazing song. I mean, please allow me to introduce myself. And Mick Jagger sings as if he was Lucifer. And he says, you know, try to guess who I am. And he says, I was there when Jesus Christ had his moment of doubt and pain. I was there to make sure Pontius Pilate washed his hands. You know, and there was such significance to some of those words that always made me think. And I thought to myself, you know, we can be critical of people like, and believe me, the history of the Rolling Stones personally, and their private lives, and the things that they've gone through in these 50 years, you know, I mean, they're really, you know, let's just use the word unprincipled on some levels, okay? And yet, in the end, when I was sitting there in this auditorium, and I'm sitting there in this arena full of people, many of them who are older, who are much older than me, you know, because they've been following them for all these years. There was a certain camaraderie and a closeness. And also Margaret, my brother's girlfriend, you know, my brother, you know, God bless him, he was married and divorced. And Margaret also, you know, she was married and divorced. And now they're, you know, dating each other, and she was there with her kids. And she came into the stadium, man, she was just like a 16-year-old. I said, whoa, at the Stones concert, you know. Oh, you're here with your brother. And she was so happy that the three of us were there. And she was so, you know, glad to be able to give us these tickets. They were $100 a piece, you know, to sit up there where your nose would bleed. And I was just so moved. And it was such a wonderful experience. And I just felt like it was like something went in a complete circle. And I'd never seen the Rolling Stones live. I've been to many concerts. I'm a person who has a history. And I've always connected my life to rock and roll music. And I've always listened to the Stones. I never bought one album, one Rock and Stones album. I never went to one concert. But Margaret had been to 10 of them. She's seen the Stones 10 times. My brother Jim went to one concert in 2006 when they came through. My brother Steve and I had never been to a rock and, you know, a Rolling Stones concert. So I just was pleasantly surprised. God was really showing me. He says, you know, life is about heart. You know, and even these guys have gone through their lives. You know, and God only knows the good and the bad that they've done. But somehow, when our life comes to a point when we're about to leave, all that's going to really matter is your artistic relationship with people. And I felt when Mick Jagger was down there, when these people, they were smiling and they were happy, and they were giving themselves. They gave themselves. You know, 72 years old. You know, 2 hours and 15 minutes. They came out and did a 15-minute encore. After the encore, they came out and you know, the stage went dark, and suddenly the lights came on, and there was this choir of young ladies on both sides of the stage, all dressed in white, and they were all from Duke University. And they started singing, "You can't always get what you want, but if you try sometimes, you might just get what you need." And it's a beautiful song. And I was so surprised because I had forgotten that song. I wasn't thinking that the Rolling Stones were the ones that did that song. And when they sang the chorus, you can't always get what you want, but if you try sometimes, you might just get what you need. And it's a very pleasant, beautiful ballad. And the words to me, you know, they really ring so true. That we can't always get what we want, and we're not going to. But if we try, we're going to get what we need, because that's the way God is. Now I want to change gears a little bit, and I want to give credit where credit is due. And I want to talk about President Obama. Because President Obama, 2 weeks ago, gave a eulogy at the funeral of Reverend Pinckney and these 8 persons. And I watched on YouTube, I watched this service. And I listened intensely and considered the situation. You know, at first, when I saw this happening last week, I thought, this is a little strange. Why is this president giving a eulogy at this black preacher's church? You know, this is just one more opportunity for him to kind of, you know, rub this racial issue in our faces. Honestly, that came to my mind. But I realized, you know, Reverend Pinckney, this man was a senator. Not only was he a preacher, but he was a senator. And so I listened, and I watched, and I heard the entire service. And I was so inspired. Again, I was so moved by his words. And I want to share some of these words with us. He spoke, first of all, about the people that he was there to eulogize, and then he started speaking about the history. And this is the President of the United States of America, Barack Obama. Over the course of centuries, black churches served as hush harbors, where slaves could worship in safety, praise houses where their free descendants could gather and shout hallelujah, rest stops for the weary along the Underground Railroad, bunkers for the foot soldiers of the civil rights movement. They have been and continue to be community centers where we organize for jobs and justice, places of scholarship and network, places where children are loved and fed and kept out of harm's way and told that they are beautiful and smart and taught that they matter. That's what happens in church. Really true. Of course, not just the black church. A church is supposed to do all of those things. You know, it's the place where God and people are supposed to come together. That's what the black church means. Our beating heart. The place where our dignity as a people is inviolate. When there's no better example of this tradition than Mother Emanuel, a church built by blacks seeking liberty, burned to the ground because its founder sought to end slavery, only to rise up again, a phoenix from these ashes. When there were laws banning all black churches' gatherings, services happened here anyway, in defiance of unjust laws. When there was a righteous movement to dismantle Jim Crow, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. preached from its pulpit, and marches began from its steps. A sacred place, this church, not just for blacks, not just for Christians, but for every American who cares about the steady expansion of human rights and human dignity in this country, a foundation stone for liberty and justice for all. That's what the church meant. We do not know whether the killer of Reverend Pinckney and 8 others knew all of this history, but he surely sensed the meaning of his violent act. It was an act that drew on a long history of bombs and arson and shots fired at churches, not random, but as a means of control, a way to terrorize and oppress, an act that he imagined would incite fear and recrimination, violence and suspicion, an act that he presumed would deepen division that traced back to our nation's original sin. He's talking about this young man, Dylan Roof. When he went into that church, we don't know exactly what he was thinking and feeling, but he must have been aware that he was in a place where he was going to create this kind of animosity, this kind of destruction, this kind of disunity. Oh, but God works in mysterious ways. God has different ideas. This is our president. God works in mysterious ways. God has different ideas. He didn't know he was being used by God. Oh, that is a very heavy sentence. To say that this young man going in there with this intention was used by God. It's almost, if it wasn't for the president being the one saying it, I don't know if anyone would have gotten away with it. But he was in the spirit, he was in the moment, and he was making a very bold statement. Of course, God didn't want this young man to do this. Of course, God doesn't inspire him to do that. But the president understood this circumstance, this situation. God knew what was going on. And God understood he's going to do something out of this. Blinded by hatred, the alleged killer could not see the grace surrounding Reverend Pinckney and that Bible study group. The light of love that shone as they opened the church doors and invited a stranger to join in their prayer circle. The alleged killer could have never anticipated the way the families of the fallen would respond when they saw him in court, in the midst of unspeakable grief, with words of forgiveness. He couldn't imagine that. I don't think any of us would have imagined that or understood that. I don't think the president himself, even when he was speaking these words, I don't think he fully could comprehend and understand how important what he was just saying was. The President of the United States. The alleged killer could not imagine how the city of Charleston, under the good and wise leadership of Mayor Riley, how the state of South Carolina, how the United States of America would respond, not merely with revulsion at his evil act, but with big-hearted generosity, and more importantly, with a thoughtful introspection and self-examination that we so rarely see in public life. Blinded by hatred, he failed to comprehend what Reverend Pinckney so well understood, the power of God's grace. This whole week, I've been reflecting on this idea of grace. The grace of the families who lost loved ones. The grace that Reverend Pinckney would preach about in his sermons. The grace described in one of my favorite hymnals, the one we all know. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. He sang those words when he spoke them. I don't think we realize how profoundly significant what took place at that church is. Think about this. All these previous months, all these situations that happened in Missouri with, different black young men being arrested and all these problems with the police and the riots in the streets and the anger and the resentment and the rebellion and the accusations going on and on. And in every one of those situations, everything that happened was so unclear. Oh, those police, they were racist. They only did this because he was black. And it turns out that 3 of those 6 police officers were actually black themselves. One of them was a black police woman. And all of these issues were so vague and unclear. But this event, it was nothing vague or unclear about it whatsoever. That young white man went into that black church and he shot and killed 9 people because their skin was black. Absolutely clear. So, shouldn't the result be, see, I told you. America's a racist country. America's an evil country. Look, exactly what we said. It's exactly what we told you. But what happened was different. Something was different. Listen to these words. This is the President of the United States seeing things in a higher scale, on a spiritual level, evoking the Spirit of God, the grace of God, the forgiveness of God, recognizing that whatever this young man did, there was something more profound and deep happening. I don't think any of us realized. The President completely, he took a situation that could have been so terrible and he gave us God's perspective so profoundly and so deeply. And the reaction, suddenly, all this hatred and resentment, I could feel it. When I listened to the speech and when the next days afterwards, I had the sense something has changed. Spiritually, something has happened. According to the Christian tradition, grace is not earned. Grace is not merited. It's not something we deserve. Rather, grace is the free and benevolent favor of God, as manifested in the salvation of sinners and the bestowal of blessings. Grace. Our President Obama recognizing, grace isn't something you earn. It's the love of God given to us. We have to be willing to receive that love. We have to be humble to accept that love. We have to humble ourselves. Recognize that we're all sinners. We all have some problem. None of us can point the finger at the other one with confidence. But what we do is we find a particular point that we're better than someone else in. And then we can point the finger. Oh, I wouldn't do that evil thing. He did it, but I wouldn't do it. And in that way, we think we're justified to accuse someone else of something. But actually, in the bigger scheme of things, we're not. We should never accuse other people. I learned that when that police officer came and he gave me that ticket, and it wasn't a ticket, it was just a warning, and it was like this forgiveness. This was a forgiveness. I felt it. It was a forgiveness. It was a grace. It was the grace of God in that little moment in my life, sitting there in that van, waiting to go out selling. That same grace we're meant to give to each other. The President felt that, and he gave that at this service. He opened it up, and he gave it to America. As a nation, out of this terrible tragedy, God has visited grace upon us, for He has allowed us to see where we've been blind. He has given us the chance where we've been lost to find our best selves. We may not have earned it, this grace, with our rancor and complacency and short-sightedness and fear of each other, but we got it all the same. He gave it to us anyway. He's once more given us grace. But it's up to us now to make the most of it, to receive it with gratitude, and to prove ourselves worthy of this gift. That's the President of the United States. Preaching God's grace. In my lifetime, I've never experienced that. Each president has their moment. And President Obama, I believe he was profoundly affected. He said, all this week I've been reflecting about the idea of God's grace. People change. We've got to change, all of us. We've got to grow up and recognize. I believe God is really working in this country profoundly. And then having heard this speech, and then, being here in North Carolina, and having the 33rd wedding anniversary of being blessed by true parents. I'm not going to go into the rest of the speech, but I think about, our true parents and what they've taught us, and the heart and the spirit that we're meant to have. Yesterday, Saturday morning, I got up very early and I drove to Winston-Salem. Because as you know, our brother Wellborn Rozier had a stroke a couple of weeks ago. He had a stroke the same Thursday morning that our other brother, Curtis, was taking his life. The same morning. That Wednesday evening in Charleston, South Carolina, is when this young man went into that church and killed those 9 people. It all happened in the space of these moments, life and death. And I went and we were, what happened is, Wellborn's situation deteriorated. He got pneumonia, and he was on, had a tube to breathe, and he was being fed when he had the stroke, his brain bled, and the parts of the brain that allow for you to be able to feed yourself and breathe and do these kinds of things, they were damaged. So Karen, his wife, and Sehyun and Teresa and his family was told, if we continue to let him live, he's going to be always in this, vegetative state. He can't improve. This part of the brain has been damaged, so he will always be 100% dependent to go to the bathroom, to be fed, everything. He'll live on a machine basically the rest of it, and he probably won't ever open his eyes again. He won't be able to talk to people. And so his wife and his son, they had to make a decision. And so they decided, okay, it's time to let him go. So actually I got the call, Wednesday night, Thursday, and Saturday morning on July 4th, we're going to say goodbye to Wellborn. So I drove there Saturday morning, and we went into the room, and it was so beautiful. You guys were there. Some people were there. Bruce and Bergie were there. Of course, Karen, Wellborn's wife, and his son, Sehyun and Teresa, and the Suttles. And we made a circle around his bed. We held his hand. Of course, he's just out of it. And we prayed. Each one of us prayed. And we said our goodbyes to Wellborn. And we sang songs. And we cried. But it was so beautiful. And it was, I felt so peaceful. And so much I felt God's grace. And how blessed we are. How so blessed we are. To know true parents. To know that we're connected. That we're eternally connected as a family. That we're all in this together. And I realized, the difference, saying goodbye to Curtis, right? And saying goodbye to Wellborn. Curtis, he went all by himself. He made the decision. Without any of his friends or family there, he left us. Out of, whatever, fear, resentment, frustration. But he was alone. He didn't let us share that moment with him, in a way. And here we are, we're with Wellborn. And we're sharing that moment with him. What could be more profound and deep than to be with a person at the moment that they're going to leave this earthly plane and go into the spiritual world? Many people don't have that option. Some people die all the time, every day. I asked the nurse, I said, how many people in this hospital every day? I said, 20 or more? She said, yeah, more than 20. Think about that. This one hospital in Winston-Salem, more than 20 people every single day go from the earthly life into the spiritual world. Do you know every single day on this planet Earth, about 200,000 people pass into the spiritual world? 5 times the number of people that went to the Rolling Stones concert. 5 times filling that stadium every single day pass from this earthly life into the spiritual world. Sometimes, because of some kind of violence, obviously. Other times by natural causes, of course. But nobody understands or comprehends as much or as deeply as us true parents gave us, what a blessing, you know, true parents gave us to comprehend and to understand. And by the way, for your information, as far as we know, Wellborn hasn't left us yet. You know, after the service, we were asked to leave the room. All of us left the room, and about 4 nurses went inside the room to take the things out of his mouth and throat and everything. And we were under the impression that once they took this stuff out, very quickly he would pass away. But what happened is, I moved over and I walked around the corner, and I was standing in a room, and there was a window going into Wellborn's place. So I actually was standing there watching. The shades were down, but I could see through the shades, and I watched, you know, the nurses. You know, they were very careful and they were very considerate. I was very impressed, you know, the people, when people are dealing with life and death, you know, some people, it's tough for them. They don't know how to deal with it, even their doctors or whatever. And then, after a while, I was watching this, and then after a while, we were invited back in. And everyone had left. People left because it was time to go, except for Karen and Se-Hyun and Teresa. And I walked in, and, you know, Karen said, "Oh, come in, you know, sit down." And we were going to sit there and wait for Wellborn to take his last breath. And so we sat there. And sat there. And sat there. And then we started talking to each other. And then we sat there 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours. During that time, we were talking, and we started talking with each other about different, and then we were giving each other's testimony and talking about Wellborn's life, and I was asking Karen questions. It was very beautiful. But what happened is, finally, the nurses would come in, and they, "Do you need anything? Do you want some drink?" You know, and they'd bring us some sodas. But they couldn't. No, none of them can tell you or say when a person is going to pass away. See, what happened is everything to help him breathe was taken out, so he was breathing by himself, but he's not able to get enough air. So he's eventually going to not be able to continue breathing. But the nurses assured us, you know, they're giving him, you know, different types of medications so that he's in no pain. They said, "Don't worry, he's in no pain whatsoever. He doesn't know what's going on. We're just waiting, you know, for his body to slow down, and then his heart rate will eventually go down to 0. But after 7 hours, you know, he was still Wellborn. And it was kind of funny and humorous, you know, because it was okay. We were all there waiting. And so I was so grateful, actually, to be able to be there. But finally, one of the nurses came in and she said, "Well, you know, most of the time it happens very quickly, but yeah, it might happen today. It might happen tomorrow. It could go on for a couple of days." So poor Karen, you know, she's been sitting there that long. But of course, hey, it's all right. It's Wellborn. If for some reason you know, God wants you to stay connected to planet Earth for a day or two more, if July 4th wasn't your day after all right, let's see how July 5th is. You know, what's on your schedule? Wellborn, you know, is July 5th okay for you? Anyway, as far as we know, Wellborn is still slowly making his way to the next world. So I just want this service today is to remind us to really be grateful, you know, for God's grace. It's amazing grace that God has given us. We live in such a profound and special time. And even when the world looks like, the country or the world looks like it's about to explode, and there's so many terrible things happening, and people are doing such terrible things to each other, but even out of that evil, out of the bad things that people do, the love of God, the truth of God, the goodness of God is more powerful. God's love is more powerful. True love. True love. And I've seen it, and it's powerful. And we're very fortunate. We have the opportunity to share that with each other. To be brothers and sisters to each other. And as I say, every time, God wants us to be the ones to set the example, to set the standard. One of the nurses that was coming in there frequently, she was a very jovial, very beautiful, about 35-year-old, black woman, and she told us, she says, I've worked 15 years in such and such, and this particular, and I really wanted to be moved to this area where people pass, because I knew that God has to be here. Basically, she was saying, she said, the situation with doctors, many doctors, and many, these people that work in the hospital, they don't know how to deal with this situation. They don't have that deep faith. She says, I know you have that faith. You know that God is not abandoning you when someone dies. And she herself, and she sincerely said to us, she said, many times I see the doctors. When, a doctor takes the what's it called?
Hippocratic oath.
Hippocratic oath. And that oath is to save lives. But sometimes they can't. And sometimes it's because, they make mistakes, which is, frustrating for them in itself. But sometimes they simply can't, because it's out of their hands. Okay, well born. Well born. He's more likely with us now than he was a few hours ago.
Why?
He passed at a little after midnight. He went. So then he can be here now. He couldn't be here then because he was trapped in that body of his. Maybe he's around. I hope not. I hope he's in a better place than this. I mean, this place is good, mind you. You know what I mean. If anybody's had a spiritual experience, you know what I mean. But if he wants to be here. Anyway, doctors take this oath. And so, think about it. Many doctors, they're not religious people. They don't have this belief in God, to the extent that some people do, like us. So when they see death, and when someone dies, and they're trying to do what they're trying to do, it's a kind of a failure for them. And so subconsciously, many times, they're very frustrated. They don't know what to do. They don't know how to deal with it, actually. And so, in that very moment, they might be with the family of the people who have just died. And so they're, emotionally and intellectually, they don't know what to say. And so they start talking about, the medical this, the medical that, saying things that the people that are right there don't necessarily understand. Karen was sharing with us, these last 2 weeks, so many different doctors were coming in and out, and sometimes they would say things to her, and it was just so unclear what was going on, and she had to keep asking questions. And so this beautiful woman was sharing with us, giving me a better kind of understanding or sympathy for the doctor. So that's why sometimes these doctors, they they can't say the right things at the right time. You know, so she said, you know, that's why, you know, she's here. She was very, very soothing, very wonderful person to be there. Of course, you know, in a way, we didn't need that, but it was wonderful. We were sharing with her, and she was there with Wellborn. So, so the bottom line is, we are such blessed people. We have received such amazing grace from our true parents. And that even death itself, you know, True Father taught us, he said it years ago, you know, he said, even if I were to die, even in the 70s, in some of Father's speeches, he said, even if I was to die tomorrow, God's providence will roll on. God's providence will be fulfilled, because already the foundation is there. The conditions have been set. You know, true love has been planted. When I went there to spend time with Wellborn and Karen and listening to her testimony, do you know she joined the Unification Church in 1967 in San Francisco? 5 years before True Father even came to America. Daikon Anuki witnessed to her on the campus and took her and brought her to Papa Che's lecture. These are the names we know, you know. Daikon Anuki, Papa San Che. And she, you know, she lived in India for 5 years before that, as a girl with her father. And she came to resent churches and religion, because she saw in India how so many people suffered, and how the churches fought amongst each other, and how the churches would give big sermons, but still people were dying of starvation. Nobody seemed to be able to solve this problem of evil and starvation. And so when she came back to America and she became a student at San Francisco State University, she had no interest in religion. But she said one day, very contradictory to her nature, she went outside to sit on the grass to study for a test. She said, I never go outside to sit on the grass and study for a test. And she went out there that day. And that's when Daikon came up. He couldn't even speak English. He says, come, you know. And she felt sorry for him, and she went and she heard the fall of man. First lecture she heard was the fall of man. She loved it, because it was talking about evil, where evil came from. And but then when she heard the principle of creation, oh no, God. She didn't want to hear about God. But she stayed and went to the dinner, and she joined. 1967. You know. And she's sitting there with Wellborn in the blessing of 1982. I'm going to tell you a story that she told me. I don't know why she started telling us this. There was no one there. Even her own son and Teresa weren't listening. And she started telling it with tears. She said in 1982, just before the blessing in 1982, she was struggling with something. She didn't say what. And she was really in a miserable situation, and she went to Belvedere, and she was in the garage where True Father would come to speak. And she was in the garage, and she sat in the corner, right near the front row, but she was in a corner position, just sitting there. And she was, you know, really kind of praying, oh, you know, I'm not loved. God, do you really love me? Am I really loved? That kind of, you know, we all know. You know, sometimes we go through these things, you know, and, you know, Satan, evil, come and try to make you feel whatever. And she was feeling these terrible things, and she's sitting there praying, and Father walks in. And as Father's walking in, he turns and he looks at her. He looks her right in the eye, and he's kind of smiling like this, and then he gets up, and Father starts speaking. And then Father's going around, hitting people in the head like he does during his speech. And he comes over to her, and she had said in her prayers, she said, God, I hate to be hit in the head, but if you need to hit me in the head to get on me, then go ahead and hit me. And Father came over, and he went like this, and he stopped. He took his hands, he he put his hands around her head. And he held her head like this, and he bent down, and he kissed her, and he went real loud, smacked her right on top of the head. And he looked up like this, and he, with a beaming smile on his face, he shook her head and he said, "I love you." And then he went on and continued his speech. She was tearfully sitting there in this, telling this story. And I'm sitting there like this. God, I mean, I've heard stories like this before, but my God, you know. And there was not even anybody there listening except me. And I thought, wow, yeah, I remember. I remember our true parents. I remember Father speaking at Belvedere, you know, the kind of heart that he had. And the promise that he made to all blessed couples. He said, when I bless people, I will take responsibility for them for eternity. So, we are in God's hands. You know, the world is in, not just us, not just the member, the world is in God's hands. You know, God's hands. You know, from every leader in the world, they don't know it, but we're in God's hands. You know, President Obama, at the end of his eulogy, he started singing Amazing Grace. You know, watch it. Go home and watch it. He didn't have a very good voice. It was just like any of us trying to sing. It was in the moment, you know, and everybody joined in. It was beautiful. We've got to, you know, give credit where credit is due. Recognize that God is with us. God is working in amazing ways. So let's honor, you know, our brothers and our sisters, and don't be afraid of difficulties and struggles that come. I mean, it's amazing that God brings blessings and difficulties sometimes in the same moment. I was sitting there at the Rolling Stones concert with my brothers, you know, listening about, you know, it was just before it was starting, and my brother Steve, you know, he looks at me and he says, you know, Dad went to the doctor, you know, and they wrote it down on his paper this time. And I said, what do you mean? He says, yeah, they wrote down Alzheimer's. You know, this is the first time they've written it down. He said, I knew my dad, you know, my dad is beginning to go through this very quickly. He's losing his capacity to remember things. And, you know, I knew it, so it wasn't a shock. It wasn't, you know, it's difficult news, it's tough news. But I'm sitting there with my brothers and you know, in a moment of joy and happiness and excitement, hearing some bad news at the same moment. And I'm thinking, well, God will take care of us. It's okay. We're in God's hands, for better or for worse, in sickness or in health. You know, the good, the bad, and the ugly. We're in God's hands. And so God just wants us to do our best. Do our best. And be confident, be bold, be sure. Okay, thank you. Please join me in a brief prayer. Dearest Heavenly Parent God, please, these words, I know they don't just come from me, they even came from our President. These were your words through him for us, as well as the many experiences that we all have. You teach us, you're with us every day, each one of us. You are a part of our lives. You want to be a part of our lives. And if we open our heart to you, you will guide us all in every circumstance, in every situation, whether they be suffering situations or whether they be wonderful, happy situations. You want to be with us. You want to show us that you are our parent and that we can learn lessons and we can grow and we can become better citizens of the kingdom of heaven. We are all in this together. Please help us to not point the fingers at each other anymore. Help us to unconditionally love and forgive and unite. Our true parents did that all during their lives. And sometimes we don't know whether things could have been different, but it doesn't matter. Things are the way they are, and we will do our best to have the right heart, the right spirit. Please bless each and every blessed family here, and every member and every person who is in this room, and all of our family and our friends, even our ancestors. We just, and Wellborn, at this moment, we just say a special prayer for him from the pulpit as the pastor representing the Triangle Family Church. We remember him. We know him. He was our brother, and we're grateful that he was with us. And now we're grateful that he can be with you. And we just pray that you'll embrace him. And if there's anything that was difficult or a struggle or a hardship for him or his wife or his son or Teresa or anybody, please, Father, help us to be humble and to be willing to be responsible for whatever the situation is to make it better. Let us just be responsible and try to make it better. Thank you. Thank you for your incredible patience with us and for the amazing grace that you give to us every single day. And now you have been liberated because of true parents, because of the providence. You can exercise incredible power and authority in each one of our lives. And we want to invite you to be in our lives and sense that you're with us. Father, I pray these things and report these things as Blessed Central, all the Blessed Central families here, and John Pace and Sharon Pace's name is a Blessed Central family. Amen and Adieu.